Hello world, this is H.L. Quist and I am the Mythbuster, and have I got a story for you today with some real insight into our president, possibly? Okay. Some time ago, in fact it was last week, I read a piece in the Wall Street Journal by Bret Stephens, and the title of the article was "The Man That Would Be King." And some of you may remember that this was made into a film. This is a Rudyard Kipling story from way back, and it's a story that's set in Afghanistan, of all places, in the, say, 1850 or 1860, and it starred Sean Connery as a young man, and Michael Caine even had a brief appearance by Christopher Plummer. But what the storyline is simply this, and then I'll get into the comparison, because you know I use movies and myths and fables to point out the fallacy of the human condition and so forth, particularly of our politicians, and that's what this story is all about. So they end up, they were with the British Raj in India, excuse me, and they end up in Afghanistan and come up with the insane idea, the improbable idea, that they would want it to be king of this land. And so Sean and Michael, with their military expertise, they gather a small band army, and they've got all the weapons and so forth, and they head up on their venture. And all of these tribal people in Afghanistan are warring, and they find a particular village where they endear themselves to them and so forth, and they start defeating their enemies, and they gain stature and prestige and so forth. And then the big moment comes. Here is Sean Connery. He's leading his ragtag army, and he's charging into battle, and he's got on horseback, and he's got this flowing robe and this Arabic dress and so forth, and an arrow hits him right dead into the heart. He doesn't fall. He's not even wounded. He doesn't bleed. All of his army and all of the enemy immediately fall to the ground in awe, because they have discovered their God, that this must be a God. He doesn't bleed. And so, of course, Sean takes advantage of the situation, and he declares that he is the son of Alexander the Great. And they endow him with all the riches and so forth, and he enjoys all the prestige, and actually he's the judge and jury. He makes all of the decisions in the community and so forth, and this is all going well until he makes the fatal error, as this is all about the weakness of the human condition, particularly politicians. This is all about, becomes a matter of ego and greed and lust, and he decides that he wants to marry this beautiful tribes lady and so forth. And that's his first big mistake. And he's no longer married, and his bride bites him in the neck, and he bleeds. And the priestess and the monks around him see him bleed, and they say, "Ah, this man is neither God nor devil. He is not a man." And that begins the undoing. Of course, they have to flee for their lives. Unfortunately, Sean Connery doesn't make it, but Michael Caine makes it back to civilization and able to tell the story to Christopher Plummer, you know. Anyway, here's the moral of the story, or here's the rest of the story. The comparison between the man who would be king and our president. Okay, you ready for this? I think it's a fantastic insight. He talks about the improbability. What was the probability that these two ex-soldiers would become, one of them would become a king? And what was the probability that Barack Obama would become president? His parents' marriage and having this child and so forth was so improbable. The audacity of hope and his journey was so improbable. As a fact, Bret Stephens says that if it weren't for the improbability of it, it would never have happened. He would have never gotten to the White House. And then he talks about the uniting. And of course, Sean Connery, he really did unite these warring villages and tribes people and so forth. And of course, our president has said he was going to be the great uniter. And he did. He pulled all these segments of society together, and a lot of people bought into that dream. But then as human beings, we're all tempted, the temptation. And of course, it was Sean's lust that undo his position as king of this area. But the president too said that he was going to eschew all of the executive privileges, and he has begun to abuse his position too as president. Interesting, isn't it? And Sean brought order to this lawless area and so forth. But the irony in our president is that we are becoming more polarized, and he is not the uniter. It's kind of interesting. And of course, you've got the racial thing too that enters in. Here, Sean Connery was a white god in a black community, a Muslim community, if you will. And then we have a black president with, still, I assume there is a white majority in this country. But anyway, the most important thing was about the ascendancy, this improbability too. But it was a ruse that Sean Connery used. I mean, no one knew he had the armor underneath, and that he attained this status because of, in this particular case, he was an imposter. And what Bret Stephens says in his piece in the Wall Street Journal, which is so important, is that Barack Obama seduced a nation quickly. He came from nowhere. No one really knew who this person was. Kind of like Sean Connery, of course. And he rose to power so fast, and what history will write is how he lost it. Lost his power so quickly. And I think it's a wonderful insight into the human condition, our political situation, and what have you. Because nobody really knows who this man is. There are all kinds of rumors and innuendo and everything. And hopefully at some point it'll be sorted out. But what Bret is indicating here is that it's going to be the undoing of this presidency. Okay? And you'll remember, in the case of Richard Nixon, that he was, the Republican Party went to him and said, look, you cannot stay in office. For the benefit of the country and for the party, you must resign. And don't forget that after Jimmy Carter's rule, which there wasn't anything, nefarious that went on, but the Democratic Party lost power for 20 years. And that's what the Democrats are faced with right now. Will they come to him and say, look, we're going to get wiped out in November. We need to make a change. Is Hillary Clinton going to be the next president? Who knows? Anyway, I thought you would enjoy this story. I will talk to you again soon. This is the Mythbuster, and goodbye.